Hello and welcome to Reformed Thinking.
It's good to be back.
We are jumping right in today. As the name of our show suggests, we like to take a substantial text, something with some real weight to it, and, well, see how it holds up.
See how it aligns with Scripture, how it helps us make sense of things.
Exactly. And today, we're looking at maybe the most influential Christian apologist of the 20th century, C.S. Lewis.
Specifically, his book, Mere Christianity.
But we're not trying to tackle the whole thing. That would be ambitious. We're zooming in on just one chapter. It's the chapter titled Hope.
And this is a timely subject. I find that in our circles, people who hold to the Westminster standards, people who love good, solid theology, we can sometimes be a bit suspicious of the word hope.
I know I am. When I hear hope used out in the world or even in some churches, it just sounds like optimism.
Right. Wishful thinking.
Yeah, it sounds like a cat poster that says, hang in there. It just feels a bit flimsy.
We prefer terms like justification or sanctification, something you can really get your teeth into. But Lewis is so helpful here because he doesn't treat hope as a mood. He treats it as a virtue.
A theological virtue, in fact.
Right. It's right up there with faith and charity.
Which means it's not optional. It's not something you just happen to have if you're a naturally sunny person. It's a discipline.
It's a duty. Lewis argues that this continual looking forward to the eternal world is not a form of escapism, which is what the critics always say. He says it's something a Christian is meant to do. It's part of the machinery of the Christian life.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack why Lewis thinks aiming for heaven is the only practical way to live on earth. We'll look at the 3 ways humans deal with their internal longing, and yes, we're going to try to make sense of the harps and crowns.
The imagery of heaven is always a stumbling block, so we'll definitely need to spend some time there.
Okay, let's start with the paradox. Lewis opens this chapter with a historical observation that I think is just brilliant. He completely flips the script on the idea that if you're thinking about the next world, you're useless in this one.
That's the standard critique, isn't it? He's so heavenly minded, he's of no earthly good. You hear that all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
But Lewis says the historical record proves the exact opposite.
He does. He points right to the apostles. I mean, these were men who were arguably more focused on the return of Christ and the kingdom of heaven than anyone who has ever lived.
Absolutely.
And yet, who did more to change the face of the ancient world?
Nobody. They set the conversion of the Roman Empire in motion. They didn't just preach an idea. They fundamentally altered society's view on the value of human life. The whole social fabric changed.
Then he points to the Middle Ages. The men who built that civilization, the ones who created the universities and the cathedrals, were men who believed firmly in a hierarchy of values that all pointed to God.
And then his third example, which is maybe the most concrete one, the English evangelicals.
This is a great one because it's so tangible. We're talking about men like William Wilberforce.
Right.
Men who abolished the slave trade. These were not secular humanists. They weren't driven by some modern idea of human rights.
No.
They were driven by a deep biblical conviction that every single human is made in the image of God and is an eternal being. Their focus on eternity is what gave them the stamina to fight the massive economic structures of their day.
So the argument is that because their minds were anchored in the next world, they had a much longer lever to move this one.
Correct. They left a permanent mark on earth because their minds were occupied with heaven.
And Lewis twists the knife a bit here. He says that Christians, in the modern world have largely ceased to be effective. And the reason isn't that we're too heavenly minded.
It's that we aren't heavenly minded enough.
Exactly. We've stopped thinking about the other world. We've become so desperate to be relevant here. And now that we've lost the very thing that made us distinct, the very thing that gave us any power to change things in the first place.
He boils this all down into a rule. And if you take one thing away from the chapter, I think this is it.
I agree. He says, aim at heaven and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at earth and you will get neither.
Aim at earth and you will get neither. That's a chilling thought. It implies this strange, almost backwards law of reality. It can't get the secondary thing by making it the primary thing. It just doesn't work.
It feels so counterintuitive, though. If I want to fix society, shouldn't I focus 100% of my energy on fixing society?
Logic would seem to say so, but Lewis uses an analogy that just clarifies it perfectly. He talks about health.
Oh, I relate to this one. We all want to be healthy.
Of course, health is a blessing. It's a good gift.
Okay.
But the moment you make being healthy your primary direct goal in life, what happens?
You become a hypochondriac. You're the person who's constantly measuring their food, checking their pulse, worrying about every little ache and pain. You become a crank, as Lewis puts it.
You become anxious. And ironically, that very anxiety is terrible for your health. So by trying to grab health too tightly, you end up strangling it.
So how do you actually get health?
You get it by aiming at something else. You aim at enjoying a good game or taking a long walk or doing a good day's work. You aim at the activity itself, the joy of it, the satisfaction of it, and the health gets thrown in as a sort of bonus.
This applies to so many things. Happiness, too. If you wake up and say, today, my goal is to be happy, you will almost certainly be miserable.
Mm-hmm.
But if you wake up and say, today I'm going to build this bookshelf or I'm going to help my neighbor with their yard, you might just find yourself happy by lunchtime without even trying.
And Lewis applies this same logic to civilization. We hear so much talk today about saving Western civilization.
It's a constant talking point.
But Lewis warns us that we will never save civilization as long as civilization itself is our main object. That's aiming at Earth.
So what's the answer?
We have to learn to want something else even more. We must want God. We must want the kingdom of heaven. If we prioritize the eternal, the temporal civilization gets preserved almost as a byproduct.
It's the logic of idolatry, isn't it?
Right.
When you put a created thing in the place of the creator, you don't just offend God, you end up ruining the very thing you were trying to worship.
Corrupt it, precisely.
So, okay, if the rule is aim at heaven, why is that so difficult for us?
Yeah.
Lewis then shifts gears to talk about our internal wiring. He says most of us find it very hard to want heaven at all, unless we're just thinking about seeing loved ones who've died again.
He points out a couple of obstacles. The first one is just a lack of training. Our whole culture, our education, our entertainment, it fixes our minds on this world.
Right.
We're trained to be practical materialists, even if we say we're Christians.
But there's a more subtle reason he gives. It's not just that we're distracted. It's that we don't even recognize the desire for what it is when we feel it.
This is where Lewis is at his absolute best. He's like a physician of the soul here. He says that if we really honestly look into our own hearts, we will find that we do want, and want acutely, something that cannot be had in this world.
He talks about the false promises of the world.
Yeah.
And he isn't necessarily talking about sin here. He's talking about good things.
Right. He lists things like the first time you fall in love, or just thinking about a foreign country you've always wanted to visit, or taking up a new subject that just completely captivates your mind.
We've all felt that initial spark, that feeling that says, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for.
But then what happens? You get married. You finally travel to that country. You master the subject.
And it's not quite what you thought it would be.
And we have to be so careful here. Lewis is not saying these things are bad. He's not saying you have a bad marriage or you went on a bad vacation.
That's such a critical distinction. He explicitly says he's talking about the best possible outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
The wife is wonderful. The hotel is excellent. The job is deeply rewarding. He's describing success.
And yet, even in that success, something is missing. There was something in that first moment of longing, a kind of promise that the reality didn't quite keep.
He says, something has evaded us. It's like trying to catch a scent on the breeze. You know it's there, you run toward it, but you just can't hold it in your hand.
He suggests that the object, the person, the place, the piece of music, it wasn't the thing itself. It was just a channel, a reminder. We caught a glimpse of something through that object, but when we tried to grab the object itself, we realized it was just a signpost.
So we're left with this gap. We have a desire that seems infinite, but we live in a world of finite things. And Lewis says there are basically three ways people deal with this tension.
The three archetypes of the human condition. I think every person listening can probably fit themselves or people they know into one of these categories.
Okay, let's start with the first one. He calls it the fool's way.
The fool puts the blame on the things themselves. He feels that disappointment we were just talking about. He gets the new car, and the thrill fades. He gets the promotion, and the job becomes routine. But his diagnosis is simple. I just picked the wrong one.
So his solution is just to swap it out for a new one.
Exactly. If only I had a different wife. If only I had a bigger house. If only I'd gone to a different university.
The fool is convinced that the ultimate satisfaction is available here on Earth. He just missed the target this time around.
So he spends his life Lewis uses the word trotting.
I love that word, trotting. It's so descriptive. It's this restless, almost undignified movement.
He trots from woman to woman, which leads to the divorce courts. He trots from continent to continent. He trots from hobby to hobby, always thinking that this latest thing is finally the real thing.
And he's always disappointed.
Always. Because he's trying to get infinite satisfaction out of a finite object. It's a basic mathematical error. You just can't fit the ocean into a bucket.
And you see this everywhere in our consumer culture. The entire advertising industry is built on promoting the fool's way. You're unhappy. Well, it's because you don't have this product.
It creates this endless cycle of hope and despair.
Okay, let's look at the second character. And I suspect this one is maybe more common among the kind of responsible people who might listen to a show like this. Lewis calls him the disillusioned sensible man.
This is the man who's decided that the whole business of longing was just, well, nonsense. Moonshine, as Lewis says. He looks back at his youth, at the poetry, the romanticism, all those intense desires, and he just says, well, that was just being young.
He decides to grow up, to lower his expectations.
He represses that part of himself that used to cry for the moon. He decides that life is just about being comfortable, paying your taxes, doing your duty, and not making too much of a fuss.
And Lewis is fair here. He admits that, socially speaking, this is a much better way to live than the fool's way.
Oh, certainly. This man is a much better neighbor. He pays his bills. He doesn't abandon his family to go chase some fantasy. He isn't a nuisance. He is, as Lewis says, probably happier in a day-to-day sense.
But there's a huge catch.
A massive flaw. This man tends to become a bit of a prig. He looks down on people who are still hopeful or idealistic. He calls them adolescents or dreamers. But the real danger isn't his social arrogance. The real danger is theological.
What if the longing wasn't moonshine? What if the rainbow really does have a pot of gold at the end?
That is the terrifying question Lewis asks. Supposing infinite happiness really is there, waiting for us. If that's true, then the sensible man has done something absolutely tragic.
How so?
By cultivating the so-called common sense, by callousing his own heart to avoid disappointment, he has actually stifled the very faculty in himself that was designed to enjoy that happiness.
He finds out too late, a moment after death, that his caution was actually a catastrophe. He killed the very hunger that was meant to lead him to the feast.
He starved himself to death because he decided that food didn't exist.
Which brings us, finally, to the third option, the Christian way.
And this is where Lewis moves from just observation to apologetics. He uses what's often called the argument from desire.
Walk us through the logic here. It all rests on this relationship between appetite and supply in the natural world.
Lewis starts with a simple biological fact. Creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires actually exists.
Give us his examples.
A baby feels hunger. Well, there is such a thing as food. That doesn't mean that specific baby will get food right then, but food is a real thing that exists in the universe. The hunger corresponds to a reality.
Right.
A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there's such a thing as sex.
So the existence of a natural innate desire is pretty strong evidence that a corresponding object exists somewhere.
Correct. So the Christian looks at the data from his own heart. He says, I find in myself a desire which no experience in this entire world can satisfy.
The fool says, I just need more stuff from this world. The sensible man says, the desire is fake. But the Christian says, the desire is real, but the object it's pointing to is not in this world. Therefore, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. That is such a relieving thought. It just reframes everything.
It does. If these earthly pleasures don't satisfy the deepest longing, it doesn't prove that the universe is a cosmic fraud. It just proves that earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it.
They were only meant to arouse it.
Exactly. To subject the real thing, Lewis calls them copies or echoes or mirages.
It's like you're hiking and you see a beautiful mountain range in the distance. You enjoy the view, but you don't try to eat the mountain. You don't get angry that you can't put the mountain in your pocket. You appreciate it for what it is, a pointer to something vast and wonderful.
And this leads to a very specific set of duties for the Christian, because we still have to live here. We still have to deal with all these copies.
We do. And Lewis warns against two errors here. First, we must not despise earthly blessings. This is where some Christians can go wrong. They become these grim ascetics who seem to hate the world. But the world is God's good creation. We should be deeply thankful for a good meal, a beautiful sunset, a loving family.
But we must never, ever mistake them for the real thing. We can't try to turn the copy into the original. That is where all the heartbreak comes from.
We have to keep the desire itself alive. That's the key.
Lewis says we have to make it the main object of life to press on to that other country and to help others do the same. We have to make sure that our desire for our true home doesn't get snowed under by all the cares and distractions of this life.
It's an active discipline, then. You have to constantly remind yourself, this is good, but this isn't it.
This is a very nice inn, but I'm still on the road home.
Okay, so speaking of this other country, we have to address the imagery. Because when we talk about heaven, people, even many Christians, get a bit uncomfortable. We have all these cartoons in our heads.
Lewis calls them the facetious people, the ones who try to make the Christian hope sound ridiculous. They say things like, well, I don't want to spend eternity playing a harp.
Or, I don't want to sit on a damp cloud forever. It all just sounds incredibly boring.
Lewis is quite sharp here. His response is basically, if you cannot understand books written for grown-ups, you shouldn't talk about them.
He does not suffer fools gladly.
No, he doesn't. He explains that all of the scriptural imagery, the harps, the crowns, the gold, the jewels, it's all a symbolical attempt to express things that are, by their very nature, inexpressible.
We're trying to describe a reality that exists outside of time and space, but we only have language that's stuck inside time and space.
So we have to use analogies. We have to use symbols.
Okay, so let's decode them then. Why harps? Why is everyone in the cosmic orchestra?
It's not about the instrument itself. Scripture uses musical instruments because, for many people, music is the one thing in this life that most strongly suggests ecstasy and infinity. It's the closest we get on earth to a feeling of pure, unadulterated glory.
So when the Bible says harps, it's really saying it will be like that feeling you get when the symphony swells to its climax, but infinitely more and forever.
Correct. It's just shorthand for ecstasy.
Okay. What about crowns? That sounds like we're all going to be kings, which seems like a logistical nightmare. I mean, who are we ruling over?
It's not about bureaucracy or having political power over your neighbors. Crowns are mentioned to suggest that those who are united with God in eternity will share in his splendor, his power, and his joy.
So it's about our status in the family of God. We're not just subjects. We become sons and heirs.
It suggests a true elevation of the human spirit. We will finally become what we were always meant to be.
And the gold. The streets of gold.
Again, it's not about economics. It's not that heaven has a good stock market. Gold is used to suggest the timelessness of heaven. Gold doesn't rust. It doesn't decay. It's immutable.
So it suggests a kind of beauty that lasts. A value that never fades.
Exactly. So when people take these symbols literally, they're just making a massive category error. Lewis ends this section with a very funny comparison. He says people who take these symbols literally might as well think that when Christ told us to be like doves, he meant that we were supposed to lay eggs.
That really puts it in perspective. We're talking about spiritual realities, not poultry farming.
And we have to remember that the spiritual reality is the solid thing. We tend to think of our material world as hard and real, and the spiritual world as something misty or ghostly. Lewis suggests it's the other way around. Heaven is the ultimate solid reality. We're the shadows until we get there.
Which lines up perfectly with so much of Reformed theology. The idea that God is the most real being, the ens realissimum. Everything else just derives its reality from him.
And if we are in Christ, we are moving toward that greater reality. We're actually becoming more real every day.
So let's try to bring this all together. We started with the idea that hope isn't a mood. It's a theological virtue.
We established that strange rule. Aim at heaven and you get earth thrown in. Aim at earth and you get neither. And we saw the historical evidence that the most effective people in this world were those most oriented toward the next.
Then we looked at the human condition. That persistent, nagging sense of dissatisfaction.
Which is not a defect. It turns out it's a feature. It's the signature of our design.
And we looked at the three ways. We can be the fool, constantly chasing new toys and blaming the old ones for not satisfying us. We can be the sensible man, repressing our deepest joy just to stay comfortable. Or we can be the Christian.
The Christian who recognizes the hunger as proof that the food exists, who follows the scent of the flower back to the hidden garden.
The Christian way seems to be the only one that really honors both the desire we feel and the reality of the world we live in. It allows us to enjoy the world for what it is, a beautiful echo, without crushing it by demanding that it be the original voice.
It's incredibly liberating. Think about the freedom in this view. If I know my true home is somewhere else, I can stop demanding that this world be perfect. I can forgive my spouse for not being God. I can forgive my job for not being heaven on earth.
That takes a huge amount of pressure off of everything.
It allows us to just enjoy things as created things without trying to wring every last drop of ultimate happiness out of them. We can just receive them with gratitude.
I want to leave our listeners with a final thought to chew on. We usually treat disappointment as an enemy. When we feel that little bit of emptiness after a big achievement or after a really great vacation ends, we feel let down. We feel like something went wrong.
We wonder if we made a mistake or if it just wasn't as good as we'd hoped.
But based on what we've discussed today from Lewis, I want to challenge you to view that feeling differently. What if you saw that empty feeling not as a failure, but as a signal?
A signpost.
A signpost pointing you to your true country. If you can shift your perspective that way, then that moment of dissatisfaction becomes a moment of quiet assurance. It's your soul reminding you that you are not home yet, but that home is real, and you are on your way there.
That's the realism of looking forward.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into C.S. Lewis. This has been Reformed Thinking.
Until next time.